sou a Lucinéia, da DERI, tá? E a Unicamp, através da DERI, tem a honra de receber a senhora Adriana Groh, que está na palestra. Welcome. Ao final deste evento, teremos 15 minutos para perguntas, caso vocês acharem necessário, tá bem? E também, se vocês tiverem dúvidas em relação à DERI, nós temos um QR Code que está aqui no balcão, tá? Vocês podem copiar. E também, caso queira declaração de comparecimento, também vocês copiam o QR Code para que a gente possamos providenciar também na DERI, tá bem? E é isso, gente. Eu desejo a vocês uma ótima palestra. Fiquem à vontade.
Is on? Not yet. Hello, everyone. Yes. Hi. My name is Adriana Groh. Thank you for the introduction. I repeat it because unfortunately I don't speak Portuguese, so I only can do this. Now it's on. Thank you. I can only do this little lecture in English. I hope that's okay. If I'm blasting ahead and you lose track, please just give me a sign and stop me so I can slow down. Sometimes I get very excited about the topics that I'm about to speak of, and then I speak very fast. Before I talk more about myself, who in the room has a background in computer engineering or computer sciences or data sciences? Okay. What's your background? In engineering?
Physics. Physical engineering.
Physics. Okay, so not software, but you also work with software, basically, I guess. Okay. So it's good for me to know. Thank you for sharing, because then I know how deep or how high I can go into that subject. But if you're all doing, if you're working with software and software development, then you probably know many, many things that I'm about to say. And I'm going to focus on connecting it to the broader mission that I want to speak about. Because sometimes we just think in our own little bubbles, but of course the big picture is always the whole field and many different subjects combined. I myself, I don't have a background in computer sciences or computer engineering. I studied public policy, so I never wrote code, but I had ideas for a startup in 2017, and I started working with a group of coders who really liked my idea, and it was an idea in the field of civic tech, so not really a for-profit and not really part of government, but from civil society, for civil society. And they liked my idea a lot, and then they said, okay, we're going to do it, we're going to help you code an app, but it's going to be open source. And I was like, sure, but why? And that's how I entered open source, and they said, because it's faster, it's better, it's more secure, it can invite people to collaborate, it's more sustainable, and in the end we can showcase it on our GitHub account, and that's really good for us. And I was like, okay, that sounds legitimate. And that's how I started working in open source software and civil society, and then also politics back in 2017. And since then, just so you know what I've been doing, I've been, after this startup, I've been co-creating and running a fund for innovation in Germany, which was under the Ministry for Education and Research. And it was basically, if 3 of you would start working on an idea, you could apply, which is unusual. I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but in Germany, usually just big companies or big organizations can apply for public money. And if just a couple of people have a really good idea, it's very hard to get money for that. So that's what we tried to change. And now, since 2 years, I'm the co-founder and director of another fund, which is investing in infrastructure maintenance. Now, before I start explaining why infrastructure is so important, especially digital infrastructure for democracy and innovation, as is the title of this input, let me start with another little story to begin with. You of course know Bill Gates, right? I think still one of the richest people in the world. I think his private net worth is over 100 billion that he made with his software company. And he, as the head of Microsoft, said, open source is a cancer. Do you know that story? He was really, really anti-open source. He hated it. Now, I forgot the number for that. Just a while ago, Microsoft bought GitHub for a lot of money. And you, of course, all know GitHub. And why does Microsoft buy the biggest open source platform to share code and for code? Because they understood that the battle against open source is lost. And open source won globally the battle for what is the best way to develop software. Now everyone is developing open source, no matter if it's in AI, or no matter if it's in health, or in manufacturing, or in governments, or at universities. Everyone understands that if you want to be fast, you want to be innovative, and you want to be successful, you've got to code open source. And so I guess when Bill Gates changes his opinion about open source, then it's pretty obvious that even the ones who hated it and called it a cancer are now convinced that this is something that is really important, and it's not a niche, like, nerd topic, because, you know, that's what lots of people think about open source. They think, oh, that's just the people doing that in their free time, but no, it's the most successful strategy for software development. And yes, Bill Gates also said, and I quote, just as we build roads, highways, and airports in the 20th century, we must now build a digital infrastructure that is open, accessible, and empowers everyone. And that leads me to my topic. The bridge you can see here on that picture, that's a bridge in Germany. It collapsed just a couple of weeks back, and everyone was shocked because how is that possible? You know, in Germany we like to think that something like that cannot happen because we have, you know, engineers who check and security guidelines and maintenance. But it did happen. It broke down, and that is just a very good picture for what happens if you take infrastructure as a given. We did that in Germany as well for other parts of infrastructure, for roads and for train racks. And there was a lack of investment going in. And I heard, well, that's not a problem just for Germany, it's a problem all over the world. But at least we have this understanding that it's a job for the public to take care of infrastructure. We have people paying taxes, and then the government is investing taxpayers' money in infrastructure. Now here, as you see, another quote from Nadia Ekbal. She wrote a book which I would like to recommend to you, especially if you're working in software development. It's a really easy read. You can do it in one afternoon, but she's painting a really nice picture here in this book, in this little report called Roads and Bridges, where she says, basically one key problem we have is that back in the days, the amount of people who contributed to software and the amount of people who used software was basically the same. But now, because everything is digitalized and because open source software is so successful, the whole world runs on it. Every hospital, every university, every company, every startup, every private user with their mobile devices, everyone runs on the same software infrastructure. But who takes care of it? Who are the maintainers? Who is giving back to the foundations? Very, very few people. We love to use this little comic here. Oh, sorry, I need to change this. There. This is one of our favorite little comics. It's from XKCD, and it looks like the game Jenga. You might know it, where you like stack wooden blocks, and then everyone needs to take out one and If you're the unlucky one, the whole tower collapses. And basically our modern digital world, which is invisible for most of us, looks like it. Looks like that. And everyone thinks it's a joke, but it's actually not. So we've built this foundation a long time ago, quite some time ago, and then we kept putting stuff on top of it. More and more software, new innovations, more applications, more code, more code, more code. Everyone, you know, in a hackathon comes up with a new project. Every new startup builds a new product. Many services that used to be on paper are now digitalized. So we just build code, build code, build code. But the foundation looks like this. And there are people out there, maybe you know some, maybe you don't, who in their free time maintain some software component that is extremely critical, like this little stick on the bottom right. And nobody knows their name, nobody ever thinks about them, nobody ever says thank you, they just do it. But if they disappear because they go on holiday, or they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore, nobody takes up that work, and then it becomes very unstable. And now if you think about the picture of the bridge again, you can imagine that you have a really important highway bridge where every day like trucks go over it and citizens on their way to work, and like, you know, you use it multiple times a day. And a few times a week maybe, or just a month, or just twice a year, somebody with like a little hammer comes and goes to the bridge and goes like, sounds good? That is what we do in software infrastructure. So why is everything still working? Two reasons. There are lots of volunteers who do this important work down there, but they are not having fun. They never get, as I said thank you. They are invisible. The work that they are doing is invisible. And you know, if you do new software development, everyone is excited. Okay, what is this new product or idea that you're having? But if you just make sure that the infrastructure is still there, nobody thinks about you. And those people are getting increasingly older. Like very few young people do software maintenance. Most of them want to do innovation. And just some elderly people are still taking care of that, and sometimes somebody is stepping up and be like, okay, I'm going to help you. And this community is very, very critical. Without them, nothing would work. And then, of course, we also have companies that invest back in infrastructure maintenance. Big companies usually, most of them sitting in the US. I'm sure you all know their names: Google, Alphabet, Amazon. But if they invest in those infrastructure components, they are not doing it for the public's interest. They are doing it because they know their services rely on it. And of course they want to make sure that their services are secure and available. So they will change it over time to fit their own interest more than the public's interest. And the reason why we have so many innovations, why software is so widespread, is because it's an open source license, and because it's free, it's available in a good quality, free of use and of change for everyone who wants to. So this is really, really important to maintain. The next slide, I think I don't need to show you, because I think all of you are familiar with open source, but maybe I say a few things. When I say it's open, available, it's free, you can use it, you can change it however you want to. In the open source communities, they use this expression of saying it's free as in puppy, not free as in beer. You know, when you say free beer, you just go somewhere and you drink beer and somebody else is paying for it, and then you leave and you leave the empty glasses on the counter and you're like, okay, bye, that was a nice night. But that's not like how software, open source software can be seen. Open source software is in free as in puppy, which means you can have the puppy, but then you need to take care of it. You need to go for walks, and you need to feed it, and it needs, you know, to play, and it needs education, and that's how you need to understand open source software. But many people understand it in free as in beer. So I just use it up, but I don't take care of it. And that's a big big problem for the open source communities. And I like the picture, so I wanted to show you. So now, why do we see a role of the state in this? I think the problem analysis is pretty clear, right? Like, you have invisible digital infrastructure that is to be understood like roads and bridges that everyone uses. We know that unlike in physical infrastructure, we don't really have anyone who feels responsible for it. We don't have an organization that has the job to do that. We don't have a dedicated budget for it that we can use every year. We rely on private interests, some companies who say, okay, I'm going to pay for it, and we rely on volunteers like us who can just, like, in their free time, fill the potholes in the motorway because otherwise the cars have crashes or whatever. And we don't want that, right? We don't want that for physical infrastructure, so why should we want it for digital infrastructure? Now, I said it's important for innovation and for democracy, and maybe, let me see if I skip one, one slide, and then we can come back to this. Why do I have this hypothesis? Why do I say that? I think it helps best to understand it if I still speak a little bit about physical infrastructure. If your town where you live has a direct access to a road or to a bus station or to trains going somewhere, if you can reach a local library, or if there's lots of companies that you can go to, if there's a school available, it changes your life completely. If you're remote and there's no access to anything, if there's no infrastructure, if you don't even have electricity, for instance, you have way less chances in life than somebody who has good infrastructure that is available and that they can use. And that's unfair. That's where inequality comes from. That's why we think in a democracy it's really important to have infrastructures in place that gives everyone a chance of a start in life. Of course, not just roads and bridges are necessary. Health and education is equally necessary, but we can count that as part of infrastructure, because there needs to be a road that goes to the hospital, right? There needs to be electricity that goes to your research facility, and so on and so forth. So if we don't have infrastructures in place, I would argue we don't have a society, because we individually, we are connected by infrastructures. It allows us to come together, it allows us to build public institutions, it allows us to have discussions, to be connected in a very concrete sense. And without infrastructure, it's very, very difficult to run and maintain a democracy where you need to be able to go to places, to make decisions, to understand connections. And now translating that to digital infrastructure basically means if my whole digital life is relying on just private services, it's very much a top-down given how I live in the digital world. And if I don't have the means to maybe create my own voting system for a local project where I want to see what my neighbors want to do, or an alternative civil network, or any kind of application that I need from a bottom-up approach, if I don't have the building blocks of software, my chances and my capabilities are very much limited. So that's why we think open, accessible, basic software components that allows you who have the skills to build software from the ground up yourself, and not relying on just getting what the market offers you, but contributing yourself, is a measure of empowerment. And empowerment is really crucial in democracies, because it gives you as a citizen a different role than if you're just receiving of, in this case, software that somebody else develops for you. And that's what we describe as sovereignty. I will talk just briefly about the Sovereign Tech Fund, which is my organization, but that's what we mean when we say sovereignty. You as an individual, you're sovereign, you have self-determined use of technology. what you want, when you want it, how you want it, and you're not just receiving it from somebody. Now, for innovation, we need to understand that if you want to innovate, infrastructure and innovation are two sides of the same coin. In Germany, as an example, we really struggled during the COVID pandemic because everything, like how we worked before, was changed by isolation measures. Like people needed to stay home, they couldn't sit together. The processes that we had in place in many cases didn't work anymore. And that's when we really saw that infrastructure is so critical, because if you don't have it in place in the moment of crisis, it's very hard to come up with it. You don't know, you have a lack of knowledge. So data infrastructure in this case is something happens at one place and you know about it at another place because the infrastructure of data is there, but it wasn't that case. So it was very hard to innovate and come up with new solutions how to tackle this crisis because we didn't have the digital infrastructure. And that also meant that people couldn't work from home when they worked for the government because they didn't know how to. They didn't have the processes to not work at their desk inside the government, but they needed to work from home. And then suddenly everyone was like, okay, how are we going to do this? So it was really hard. And the same goes for companies and for other parts of society, where the means of production, the knowledge you have, the raw materials, or the software components as open source software that you have, are really critical for you getting from an idea to a prototype, to a product, to market entry. The amount of time between all of those stages is what makes your idea oftentimes successful or not successful. And that's also why everyone in Silicon Valley relies on open source, because you're too slow. If you need to do everything yourself, and if you can't invite others to join you, and if everything's closed, from an idea to market entry, lots of time is lost. So you want to speed that up. And that is why for innovation, you need to have open systems. And that's why open source infrastructure is really foundational for democracy and innovation. And now, coming back just briefly to this, and this is where why I'm speaking to you. We don't have an institution for that, a public institution. Like in the German government, nobody thinks or nobody thought about this topic until we started to build it up. And even in other places of the world, in the United States, or also when you talk in Brussels, nobody ever thought about this. Now here comes the difference. In India, there's the India Stack, and in Brazil there are also some examples where people really think about digital infrastructure, but on a different level. So they understand that the role of the state is to maybe provide payment systems, like what's it called, PICs, or identity wallets, or government software. I think let me check, a couple of years ago also here, there was a mandatory use of open source software in both government agencies and non-government agencies since October 2003. So that's what I heard is the case in Brazil already, that you want to have 80% migration to Linux in public administration. So this is way further than in Germany. But it's just one level. And now, you need software to build and maintain software. And people forget that. They sometimes think software products just rain from the heavens, but it's not. It's like you need a whole toolbox of software, like programming languages or libraries or compilers in order to build a software product. And this is what I mean with roads and bridges. Not the payment product, like PICs, but what is underneath it? Like, what is the programming language? What are the libraries? What are the processes that always need to run in order to make it secure and available? And for this, we think there's a role for the state. And that doesn't mean that only the government should do it. It should always also be communities and companies that are involved in it. but we believe that there needs to be one dedicated body in government that takes care of those existing software infrastructures for society, for democracy, and to make sure that you're competitive and stay innovative. And that is, and I'm going to close slowly with this. This is the organization that I'm running. We're basically testing how we can build up instruments that allow us to support infrastructure maintenance so that the roads and the bridges don't crumble off the internet. And that means changing also some structures of how that is currently done, because it's not sustainable if there's just one person taking care of one very critical software component. Because what happens if that person retires? Or what happens if that person just gets very tired and doesn't want to do it anymore? And if we are not taking care of it, we believe that it's going to be privatized. And privatization of crucial, very critical, key components of society can cause a lot of trouble in the long run, because then you lose some sort of control over how it's shaped and how it looks in the future. But if it's so deep down at the roots of many goals that we have as a society, be it for society itself, but also be it for geopolitical reasons, for security, for industry, if you lose control over that and also the capabilities of shaping how it looks like, it's very, very hard to gain it back. Infrastructure is sticky. Once it's in place, once you build the highway, and then suddenly you realize, oh, that was a bad idea. We don't even need the highway here. We need it over there. Or we should have built it in a different way. It's very hard. You cannot just tear it down and then build it again. It's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to take too long. It's pretty much undoable. So that's why infrastructure is so critical, and that's why we need to think about it a little longer before we give it out of our hands, or in this case, never take it up as a public job and do it ourselves. Maybe to make this a little more specific in the end. Fortran, I don't know if you've ever heard about this. Yes, okay. Well, it's not sexy. That's what I always hear. But it's very, very widely used still, oftentimes for large data sets to model them and make, especially in climate research, to make understandable what is happening there. And there's an alternative to Fortran, which is Julia. Exactly. Julia is developed by Google. And I mean, it's fine if you have two programming languages doing the same thing, because again, think about infrastructure, you want to have redundancies. It's not good to have just one thing in place. Think about electricity systems. If you just have one, and that goes down, and you have a couple of hospitals and many, many houses that rely on that one electricity grid, and it goes down, people might die. And you don't want that. So maybe it's a good idea to have two electricity grids, and they do the same thing, and then it's not abundance, it's redundancy, and it's very, very sensible because you want to have a backup in case something happens. So it's a good thing there's Julia, but we also still need Fortran. Some people say it's too old, it's too complicated, but it's good to have two systems. And that's why, for instance, my organization invested about 800,000 euro in the Fortran programming language to support community efforts around making it more accessible, making it more widely used or better usable. And we believe that this is in the public's interest to make sure that we have this alternative to the more modern, more attractive Julia programming language. But also think about climate data modeling. It's a very important thing. Like, this is, in recent times especially, something that needs to be done and needs to be done smoothly, and we don't want to have problems already in the infrastructure, because we're going to have lots of problems at the other end, because we need to deal with climate effects. But this is an example for what I mean when I say digital infrastructure as the building blocks of all modern software that we're using is so important for many goals that we have as a society. and therefore important for democracy and also important for innovation. And I think with that, looking at the time, I might break and ask you if you have questions, and giving your questions, or no questions, I can talk a little bit longer, but now I feel like I told you quite a few of our ideas and how we're thinking about this already. So thank you, and I think you still have the microphone if somebody's got a question.
Alô. Quero agradecer a todos vocês pela presença. Thank you very much, senhora Adriana Groh. Bom, como eu disse, caso vocês tenham alguma dúvida para a DERI, aí vocês copiam aqui o QR Code, o e-mail é deri@unicamp.br, tá bem? E também na questão da declaração de comparecimento. Vocês têm alguma dúvida que queiram tirar? Só um minutinho.
Hey, hi. Thank you for coming here. It's an honor to have you here. I already knew the Sovereign Tech Fund from I think you funded the GNOME project, that I was a volunteer for a long time.
Thank you.
And I was talking to him, sorry I didn't get your name, but I was talking to him before your talk about how there is nothing like the Sovereign Tech Fund in Brazil. We have peaks like you mentioned in the gov.br website that has all the things that you said, the digital identification, digital signing, payments, and so on. But we don't have an organization that funds the infrastructure. So I would like to ask, how did you convince your governments that this is worth investing, and how could we do something like that in Brazil?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and thank you. Sometimes it sounds like a joke, but I think it's true that a lot of things needed to happen at the same time to make this very invisible problem, the lack of maintenance for digital infrastructure, so visible. And it's not nice that all of those things happen, but I think that's the true story, and I'm going to tell the honest story about it. So in, I think, 2021, Germany had the presidency to the European Council. Simon might know that in which year it was, but about 2020. And the presidency to the European Council always has a topic. And Germany chose the topic digital sovereignty. So, well, that wasn't our decision, but then we went up to them and said, what do you mean when you say digital sovereignty? And we have, I don't have the definition on the slides, I'm sorry, but we defined them along with the Ministry for Economic Affairs, which is our ministry in Germany. We define it as the self-determined use of technologies by individuals, companies, and the government itself. And of course, if that's a nice proclamation, like nice to say, but how do you put that in practice? And back in those days, I mentioned the COVID crisis. We all saw that in a crisis, in order to innovate, to find ways out of the crisis, you need to have infrastructures in place that work, like, quickly. And that wasn't always the case in Germany, in all of the cases that we would have wanted that infrastructure, and it really pointed a finger at that. Then there was also the last stretch of the Trump presidency in the United States, and that was really tricky for the relationship between Germany and the United States, in also some ways of how technology was used. And also in the very final stretches, there's a fund in the States that is called Open Technology Fund. It's part of the Ministry of like External Affairs, and it has the mission of free internet. So they support anti-censor programs and free speech in all places around the world. And from one day to another, the Trump presidency, the administration said you don't have any money anymore. They kind of put it on ice. And the whole open source community felt that effect around the world. Then also the war in Ukraine escalated, which feels very close to Germany, and also showed how critical infrastructure is, not just physical infrastructure, but before the war like really physically started, there was an attack on digital infrastructure in the Ukraine. And all those incidences kind of said, do you think enough about infrastructure? Because you're relying on the United States in some instances. You felt that you would have needed other processes, other structures in place in the COVID crisis, and you saw what happened in Ukraine. So everything was like pointing at infrastructure. We wrote a feasibility study, you can still find it on our website, about what digital sovereignty means and why digital infrastructure is so critical for it. It's a research paper. We looked at the market, we looked at surveys out there, we looked how many open source components are, and I have the numbers here, are used in other software. 99% of Fortune 500 companies currently use open source software. 80% of IT departments will have increased open source software in the next years. 140 million on projects on GitHub, and so on and so forth. And we handed in that report to the German government and saying, hey, you have this presidency on digital sovereignty, this is how it translates, this is why infrastructure is so critical for that. That was the problem analysis. We should come up with an organization that tackles that problem. And we also said in that survey that the amount of security incidents will massively increase. You've probably heard about Heartbleed in 2014. Then that was massive. And then there was, I think, 2021 Log4j. We handed in our survey that said, why is this important? What could happen if we don't do anything, etc., etc. 2 weeks before Log4j happened. We didn't have anything to do with it. It was just an incident. But I'm pretty sure that's why our proposal traveled over a few desks pretty fast, because it was like, be careful, this might happen. And 2 weeks later it did happen, and then they were like, oh, maybe it's a good idea. And that's how the Sovereign Tech Fund got established. And the reason why we're with the Ministry of Economic Affairs is because they saw the numbers and they understood this is really important for competition and innovation. It's a cross-cutting issue, it's very horizontal. It could also be part of the Ministry of Interior because it's also so important for governments. It could even be with the Foreign Office because it's something that is a very like geopolitical strategic thing as well. Like, why does India want to have the India stack? Why does Brazil want to have its own payment system? Why is the European Union now thinking about a Euro stack? Because you know that if you hand that to somebody else, and it's not about who you hand it to, it's just that if there's one reliance, it's very fragile, and you need to be in a situation where you also have services that you can shape yourself. I don't want to be understood that this is about protectionism, because I always say this needs to be open, this needs to be interoperable, this needs to be co-creative, and maybe in the end it would just make sense to not have they have their stack and they have their stack and we have their stack, but why not share one and make it open source, and then you can collaborate on the tools, and that makes them better and more secure, instead of trying to have like everyone's doing the same thing, payments, signing stuff and wallets. It's always the same technology, so we could as well just share it. But that's how the Sovereign Tech Fund started, and now we hope that other governments around the world will collaborate on that, because what we invest in is not just important for Germany or for Europe. It's important for the whole world, because everyone is using the same, like Python isn't just used in one part of the world and not used in another. Like, we all use the same building blocks. So we all should invest in it collectively, and also make decisions about what is important a bit more collectively, instead just one actor, in this case us, saying out of necessity, okay, we're going to look here and there, not there, because we only have one budget, right? And it's not enough for the whole software ecosystem around the world.
Amazing work.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
Good afternoon. I'm Marcos. I study here at IC, Institute of Computação. And I work at Innova. It's the innovation agency of Unicamp. And we had the technological park here at Unicamp, and we have some startups and some incubated companies. I'd like to know if this fund, which is the main public for the money of the fund and how to apply. If it's just for developers or companies is still available to apply.
We have a bit of a different approach because the name fund is actually misleading because we don't give out grants.
Yeah.
So maybe you can think about it the same way again with physical infrastructure. I already learned a little bit about how your highway is working in Brazil. So if I understood correctly, it's commissioned and then private companies build it and then you pay for using it. So in Germany, for at least the highway, it's also that private companies build it, but we pay a lot of public money for it, and then nobody needs to pay for using it because they paid for it by their taxes already. But there is an agency that is deciding, okay, where do we need a new highway? Do we need to enlarge this highway? Do we need to invest in maintaining it right now? So this is like centralized. And in our case, we do actually the same thing. We have this agency, the Sovereign Tech Fund, and we're looking at the software ecosystem, and then we decide which basic software components are so critical that we should invest in them. And then we look who could be the right entity to do the work that is necessary for that software component. And that can be an individual, that can be a company, that can be a community, that could be a university or a foundation. Doesn't matter, the legal structure. And then we commission work. So you have a service contract with us, and then you do, I don't know, maintenance work in Fortran, for instance. And that is how it works. So you can still apply to the fund, but it's not like a grant-giving entity. It works a little bit different. But it doesn't matter who you are, and it also doesn't matter where you are. Like, we are not locally limited. We could give a developer in Brazil money to work on an important software component that is very much used by German companies, but also by maybe hospitals in Brazil. It's super open in that regard.
Cool. One more question. Is there a paper project that you need to send in order to apply? How to apply?
No, if you go on our website, there's just a link, and then you answer a couple of questions, and you can link your GitHub or GitLab profile, or it's that was really important for us. That it's very lightweight, and that because sometimes, especially with public money programs, the application process is so difficult that the money goes to those people who know how to write good applications,
Yeah, this happens a
and
lot.
not to those people who actually do the best work. Because surprisingly often, the people who really know how to do the work and who are really experts for a subject, they don't know how to write applications. And those who know how to write applications quite often don't actually know the most about the topic. So we try to not make that mistake.
Hello, I'm Pedro. I'm not from here, from the political science. I don't know anything about computation, programming, and I'm here. We know the technologies especially when you think about different problems in different people and different contexts. We have some bias or like different problems. My English is pretty bad right now, but como posso dizer? Yeah, we have some different contexts in the world. Like the Brazil problems are not the same as Germany problems, and when you think about sharing technologies, we have this problem about.
Fala um termo que alguém te ajuda.
Como que é?
Então, é nesse sentido de. Tá, então alguém vai traduzir para mim. Nesse sentido de construir tecnologias, to develop technologies with different contexts. How do you think we can overcome this problem, this sharing, esses contextos diferentes? Como é que a gente pode superar esses desafios em diferentes contextos políticos, diferentes contextos geográficos, pensando numa comunidade, construir uma comunidade tecnológica, construir bases tecnológicas?
How to overcome difficult in this kind of context?
Differences, you mean? Or?
Quais tipos de dificuldades?
Não, por exemplo, quando a gente fala de construir uma estrutura para o Pix, por exemplo. Quando você pensa no Pix, você tem um contexto muito específico do Brasil que envolve
algumas tecnologias diferentes.
How to adapt technologies for
different contexts.
Different
Context. This is exactly the point why openness is so important here. Because if you say we develop one product, then let's say 100 people in one company develop one product, and then they give it to the whole world. Everyone is assumed to have the same needs, to want the same things, to have the same kind of user experience, and if it doesn't fit for you, not my problem, but that's just what it is. And that's why it's so important that it's open and accessible and you can shape it yourself. And if you're not focusing on one product, but on the ecosystem of what you need to develop a software product, you allow more people to participate and to come up with alternatives. And that gives more options and more choices to everyone than if you have just one product that the whole world needs to use. Imagine if, nowadays it's not that like, but Facebook was coming from a couple of people's minds and then it was used by the whole world. But if we would have had more competition and more different versions of something like Facebook, that we're really competing with each other and that we're not so dominant by one very predominant model, maybe now it would be a bit more diverse. The same goes for X, or formerly Twitter, right? There's now Mastodon and Blue Sky and all of those alternatives, and that was long overdue because just one product gives just one option and gives a few people a lot of power. So how to overcome the challenges of context is if you don't assume that there can be a product that is good enough for everyone, and for that you need open source software and lots of people coming up with alternative ideas. And this is an angle how to change it up. Was that sort of an answer?
I know there's a challenge about the monopolies you were saying about Facebook, and this is a problem too, right? Like
market concentration, monopolies.
Exactly. Oligopolies, monopolies.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we are focusing on infrastructure, because there's a market failure in this level, and if you try to balance that out by public investments, our assumption and our hope is that the effect of that's going to scale up, and that's going to be one. It's not going to be the only one, right? There also needs to be regulation. But the investments can be another angle how to break up market concentration and power concentration And I think that's something that should be in our common interest, to not have a high concentration of power in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, then, if there are no questions any longer, and nothing that I didn't mention that you were hoping from, because I mean, there's always more to talk about, but at least for me, at some point, I'm stepping back a little before I'm firing facts at you. But maybe you came here with a specific hope to hear about something, and I didn't touch on that, then now's the time. That's not a question, that's a request. So, anything that you wanted to learn or hear today, and I didn't mention it at all.
Could you open the website?
Oh, my laptop is not. You mean the website, the Sovereign Tech Fund website?
Yeah.
My laptop's not connected. I'm really sorry. It's on that.
Exactly.
I don't know if I can do it on that.
Pode, é só.
Yep.
É só na tecla S.
The program.
Yeah, sure. Surprisingly often, when you identify a problem, throwing money at it doesn't solve the problem. It's very sad. Would be nice if throwing money at problems would solve the problems, but surprisingly often that's not the case. So we believe that just the general investments that you could see on the website, just giving, let's say, money from A to B, in this case from the government of Germany to a developer, that alone is not solving the whole puzzle of why digital infrastructure is in a bad shape. Sometimes if I diminish the effects of our work, I say it's like you have a really, really deep cut and somebody's putting a Band-Aid on it. But actually you need stitches. So it's still good if you have a Band-Aid on a really deep cut, but you're still gonna need to go to the hospital and get stitches. And that's the same with investments, because you know we have a contract, and maybe the contract with a company or a single developer is for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, but at one point it ends and the money is spent. And then what happens in 3 years or in 5 years or in 7 years? You probably have the same situation again. So you need to look at the structural problems in the ecosystem. And for that, we came up with the idea for fellowships. So if you are the maintainer of quite a few important parts of software infrastructure, it might not be a good idea to apply for a work contract for lots of little different things. And also sometimes, because maintenance is nitty-gritty work, you also don't know if in 6 weeks you still need to do the same things than you're doing today. It changes. So the fellowship just allows experts, individuals, to do this kind of work, ongoing maintenance work that is never done. It's not like there's a start and end point. It just needs to be done over and over again in a specific time frame, with the security that they need, because it can be very insecure and very lonely to do this kind of work, because you usually don't have lots of people helping you. So that's why we came up with the idea of fellowships. And then maybe at one point, you know, for maintenance of physical infrastructure, we have a whole ministry in Germany that is like taking care of infrastructure. And we have lots of people working there. And maybe in the future we could even think about, in parts of government, we have something like a maintainer unit. Like 100 people or 50 people or 150 people who are software maintainers, and they are working as public servants, looking into code, fixing bugs, making security audits, making changes, or even reducing code. Sometimes projects get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that makes them more insecure and more vulnerable, and sometimes you need to cut back on code or something like that. So that could be an idea. And we understand that we, as an organization, are the place to test such ideas, to build instruments, and then we have pilots where we run it, and then we do evaluations and user feedback, and by this we want to get better step by step in changing how the open source ecosystem works in a good way. And the bug resilience program is similar. It's the idea that you know bug bounties, right? Like if you are a security researcher and you find a bug in software, and you then point it out, you get a prize by a company, for instance. Companies do that all the time to test if their software is secure. They have a bug bounty, and then security researchers can get that money. But this is actually not great for the software projects, right? They like, okay, great, now you found, like if this is a community-run project, then they're like, okay, great, you found the bug, you said there's a bug, you got the money, but who's paying for the fixing? And this is why we tried to come up with a more holistic bug bounty program. There's a saying in Germany that prevention is always better than like curing. So it's always better to not need the doctor because you didn't break your leg. So we try to train software communities in the prevention of bugs. So what are good practices that you don't even have it in the first place? Of course, there will always be bugs, but you can have a few best practices that help you prevent that. That's the first step, and then the second step is a bounty, because of course you still need the researchers to look at the code and be like, here's a bug. And then we also pay for the fixing, because it doesn't help if you only point out the problem, you also need to take care of like fixing the problem, right? So this is another program. And the third that we're just building up right now is on diversity, because as you probably all know, software development in general is pretty male dominated. And it's even more the case in open source software, and even more the case in software infrastructure. And why is that the case? I told you about the volunteers, right? If you have free time to do very nitty-gritty expert work, you need to have multiple privileges. You need to have a well-paying job, you need to have somebody who's maybe taking care of the household and the kids, because if you have that work, you don't have time to do open source software maintenance in the afternoons or in the evenings, right? Because you need to be taking care of the elderly or of the household. So that's why it's mostly, at the moment, one demographic group, and that's middle-aged, white, Northern American men. And why is that a problem? Because, I mean, thank you for doing that, right? Because otherwise nobody would do it. That's okay. But it's still a problem because they make very important decisions for all of us. And then we are back to how can it fit to different contexts. So we need to think about how, thank you developers and maintainers who are doing it right now, but we need more and different people coming in. And for that we try to come up with a new instrument as well. So that is, sorry, a quick overview of the work we're doing.
Cool. Thanks.
Is that diversity program an upcoming thing?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Yeah, we're working on it right now because it's very tricky.
Yeah.
Like, it's also tricky to not, because I'm stating it as a problem, but we need to be grateful for the work that's already also been done, right? Because it's a very hard work to be a software maintainer. So at the same time, we're telling those people thank you, but it's a problem that only you are doing it. That's tricky, and it's
I'm
also.
sure they would love help.
Yeah, I'm sure they would love help, and then it's also tricky how to not just onboard new people, but also to make sure they stay in the community for the foreseeable future. So yeah, that is what we're working on right now, and it's soon going to be on the website, but we're still cooking.
There's a program, I'm sure you heard of it, there's the Outreach program.
Yeah, we're in contact with Outreach.
Ah, great. Yeah, okay. I'm in the GNOME committee for internships.
Okay.
So it's the committee that helps onboard and create the program for both Google Summer of Code students and Outreachy students.
Okay, so we're probably going to talk to you.
Yes. Thank you. That's what I want.
Perfect.
In terms of digital sovereignty, we outside of the developer community, how can we help? How can we work to? I know you said about convincing our governments to think about digital sovereignty, but how can we, as researchers, as normal people, outside of the developer community who don't code, who don't know anything about computation, how can we help in creating, developing a digital sovereignty in Brazil or in the world?
Yeah, it's extremely tricky. It's because on the individual level, you need to have a lot of knowledge to even see the problem. So let's maybe split it up. As a citizen, you can bring up the topic maybe if you have the chance in some sort of format where decision makers listen. Like you can show them that this is something that you are aware of and they should be aware of too. But that's very hard, right? Because most of us don't really have a lot of contact with decision makers anymore. So as a citizen, to be like, hey, take care of an open and secure and available digital infrastructure, no politician, at least in Germany, is putting that high on the agenda. So it's very hard to be like, okay, I'm going to vote for you because you take care of it, because it's so hidden already. As a consumer, that's why I said maybe let's split it up. As a consumer, you have more the option to be like, okay, I will use, for instance, Signal or Mastodon over WhatsApp and X, or I will maybe contribute to some volunteer programs with whatever my means are. Maybe it's buy me a coffee, which is like, supporting a maintainer with a donation, or it's user testing, or it's, if you can code, of course, coding yourself. But it's a very difficult task to do a lot on the individual level to promote digital sovereignty. But that's why, another reason why we came up with this organization, to really put it on the agenda, and then, to be able to talk about it in different rooms and make people listen. And we think it's working because people, it's being picked up on the agenda a lot recently. But good question, thank you.
Okay, maybe I have one final question. Okay, last one, I promise. You were saying right now about, as a consumer, you can choose to use open source software, and I understand that the focus of the Sovereign Tech Fund is funding technology that is infrastructure, that's like below the open source project that you can use. So instead of funding like Signal, you would fund Python library that they use for.
Yeah, or we supported ActivityPub instead of Mastodon itself. Because, sorry for interrupting you, but just to really, the goal is not to have one other single option. Like, okay, then it's Mastodon instead of X. But that's not what we want. We want lots of different options. So we're not investing in Mastodon, we're investing in ActivityPub. Same would go for Signal.
Yeah, that actually answered the question.
Oh.
Ninguém mais? Bom, pessoal, então vamos encerrar, a apresentação. E mais uma vez, muito obrigada pela presença.